The idea that games are an art form in their own right has become less and less controversial in recent years, I think. Ever since I first played Dear Esther and everybody's gone to the rapture, both by the Chinese room, I thought a lot about what you could do with a game as a medium of storytelling, even if there's no gameplay, which there isn't really in either of those games, and how that could still place the player in a sort of uniquely immersive position within a story. And that inevitably led me to looking at the work of various solo and small team independent developers who are doing more and more interesting things with gameplay. I absolutely love indie games. They're one of the last forms of true auteur artwork where one person can sort of do everything and create an entire atmosphere and world. Just gives you a sort of a completely immersive keyhole into their mind and imagination. I think it's such a phenomenal medium for that, and there's nothing else quite like it. I discovered a thing a few years ago called the Haunted PS1 demo disc, which was all games that had a kind of retro PlayStation feel, but were horror. And on that I found a game called Echostasis Prologue by a guy called Gavin, who's also known as Enigma Studios. And he's made a sort of trilogy of 5, so 2 prologue stroke demos and a game called Mothered, where you sort of hound your bizarre mannequin mother, a game called Enigma Machine and a game called Echostasis, both of which where you sort of explore bizarre digital memories through communicating with a kind of ever more chaotic computer. So this kind of cyber horror deconstruction of what the human being is and what the player is and what the relationship between the player and the game is and so on. All very intelligent and interesting stuff that was fun but very immersive and powerful. They also all have a really unique graphical style. And so I decided I wanted to talk to him and ask him as many questions as I could about the games, about the philosophy behind them, development itself and more. So what follows is quite a long conversation between me and him at a place called the Amaze Festival in Sheffield, where we talk about all of that for quite a long period of time. I find it really interesting, and I think if you leave it in the background and have a listen, if you're a developer or someone into indie games or into games as an art form itself, you'll find a lot of interesting content in there. Please try out the games if you haven't played them yet already. If you like what this is, you know what to do. Help me out in any way you can. And yeah, do share it with anyone you think is going to be interested in this kind of thing. I'd love to do more of these and talk to some more independent developers about their whole processes, philosophies and games. And if you like listening to people talk about that, then yeah, subscribe, let me know, all the usuals. Anyway, on with the show. I hope you like it.
You've actually shipped, is it a trilogy of 3 or a trilogy of 5? Mothered and Enigma Machine and Echostasis.
Yeah.
There's another 2, right?
There's 2 demos there. So what I have is the main games, I call them. There's 3 of them, but then there's like 2 offshoots. Like there's a prologue for Echostasis, which came out over 3 years ago now. So
I have played that one as well.
Yeah, that was the one that kind of caught a lot of attention because that was fortunate enough to have been concluded on the Haunted PS1 demo disc. So a lot of people saw it just based on that.
Actually, that is where I first heard of you.
No doubt.
Ever since.
That's how a lot of people did. Yeah. So that was, I like to consider, even if it's a demo, it's a separate story. So it has a start, middle, and end. I kind of love when things do that. Like I think and that's advice I'd give to any game developer as well. Like if you're going to make a demo, like just go the extra little bit and try and think of how can I make this into its own game, because a lot of people, they make the mistake, and I made the same mistake too, of setting out and trying to make a game, that's going to be, I'm going to take 3 years to make this thing. So when I first started working on the Enigma Machine, I was fresh out of college in 2018, and I had this so basically the Enigma Machine started as a demo of a bigger game that at the time was just called like Dreamscape something or other. Looking back now, I would have probably named it something else because that's a bit generic, but it started out as a demo. So be like, okay, I have these mechanics and I have this like style, but I'm really eager to get it in front of people. Can I just start by making a demo? So I made a small level with like 3 or 4 different kind of areas within it. And I wanted to do kind of one of everything. I do everything that the main game is going to do just once, just to show like, here's what I have in mind. And as I was making it, I was like, oh, well, this is narratively kind of starting to become its own thing. So I thought of, this is organically going to create its own start, middle, and end. So what if this is just the game? Like, this is just game 1. So I really tricked myself into making my first game.
Yeah.
And that's advice I would give to any developer is kind of like, take your 3-year-long project, slice the first like 10th off it. That's now your game.
Yeah.
That is what your game is. Start there and take what you have there and see how can you kind of make it into this nice little this nice little narrative piece that has like all of the symmetry and everything that you would want from a bigger story just condensed down, and that's so much more doable. And then you get to move on to your next game, because I think it's a skill that is not really talked about a lot when people talk about making games. They're always talking about game design documents and all these things. If you're working by yourself, you don't really need a game design document, in my opinion. People might say I'm wrong, whatever, but finishing a game is a skill that there are so many challenges when you're finishing a game that many people don't ever get to find out until they're maybe year 3 into their first project, if you even get there, before burning yourself out on your first project. So I think I probably went a bit off what your question was,
No,
but yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's a common problem across pretty much all creative disciplines, I think. I mean, everything, music, film, whatever, people struggle to finish projects instead of having your gigantic, unfinishable, unmanageable vision.
And then, like, what you might have out after that is, like, you know, you burn yourself out and no one even knew you ever existed because you never release anything. The sooner you release, even just like a proof of concept or something to anything, I think you should really prioritize getting something out there first. So I know a lot of, or I've heard of a lot of things where they're like, you know, they start with like this lore and they start with all of these other kind of extraneous details that aren't really tangible as like a product that people can care about. Like, I always think that with lore, if you're starting with the lore, like, I don't know, that's a good additive to a thing that already exists. But I think the story first and foremost is what will get people in there, and the gameplay and the mechanics, and this made me feel like this. Also, it has all this cool lore. You know, sure. For me, the lore was something that was never, ever, ever thought of from the beginning. It's something that just like, well, while I'm here, might as well connect all of these things. Might as well, like, wouldn't it be interesting if all of these things were like connected in this way? And you'll find and that's another thing I'd give to developers or any creative really, is to stop worrying about the planning stages of it and the financing. Well, obviously financing is important. You need to live, you need money, whatever. But like, stop worrying about stuff like market research and stuff. Well, what do players want? It was like, well, what do you want? You know, we were saying it earlier, like, what do people want? It's like, you know, you are also people, right? People is also you. So what do you want? No one knows you more intimately than yourself. So what is it that drives you? Chances are it'll drive other people. So like, just experiment and experiment. I just like started throwing stuff at a wall. I was like, I like, you know, old PlayStation 1 graphics, and there was a couple of games in 2018 that were starting to play around with that, and the feeling, like, I wanted to explore the feelings that arise around that. So for me, it was like, I guess, a feeling of like nostalgia, but also a feeling of like, it kind of feels like in a dream where you can't really focus on anything in particular. Everything's morphing and wiggling around, and that became kind of part of the story. Like, okay, this is now the mind of an android. I'd imagine that if an android was to dream, let's avoid the obvious connection there.
What you mean at all?
I have no idea. Why would anyone say that? I imagine if an android was to like have a dream and to be sentient and have like consciousness, it would probably look a lot like a PlayStation 1 game. In my mind, that was the basis of like what this story was, and where you're exploring the mind of this android. And through that, questions start arising, like, so why are you exploring the mind of an android? Maybe it's become sentient and we're trying to understand that. Okay, cool. What could be done with that? What if it was an evil, sinister corporation and they're trying to find out where this sentience comes from so that they can not only shut it down in the android, but as seen in Echostasis, learn how to harness that in humanity. Like, now that we know the point of the point that consciousness comes into play, now we can harness that and use it to exploit people, as tech companies literally do. You know?
So in terms of the story for your Trilogy of Five, as it were, it does all kind of tie together, and as you say, the lore grew organically. Is there any kind of, what were your influences for it? Was it films, books, TV, games? Was there anything that you draw from specifically, or is it just the general atmosphere of retro and sci-fi and dystopia?
Yeah, it's God, in terms of what I draw from, like, I guess gameplay wise, has always been like the Souls series. Dark Souls 1 is like my favorite thing like ever, and all of that kind of stuff. And with that comes like Berserk, and the little bit I've read of Berserk, I love. And then in terms of movies, like I guess Neon Genesis Evangelion, and then the movie End of Evangelion, like I just love that. It taught me, wow, things can be incredibly like cerebral and personal while still connecting with like loads of people. Because like, again, chances are if you're connecting with yourself and how your own like mind works and these existential kind of fears that you have, chances are everyone else has felt the same at some point and will connect with it too. Like, not everyone, it's still incredibly niche, but they will still have some sort of thing of like, well, who am I? That's often what comes up. So like with Mothered, it was like, a role-playing game. A lot of people thought like, it's literally the full title is Mothered, a role-playing horror game.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily an RPG, but it's a horror game about role-playing, I guess you would say. So it's like an existential kind of exploration on the roles that we are kind of given and subconsciously playing in our life, and so that was one thing. And then with Echostasis, it comes into like how stories influence us and how they kind of control us, and especially ones that are exploited by tech companies and all of these kinds of things. The kind of the constructs, as they're called in Echostasis, the characters we're given and told to play along with, like, but I guess it's just also capitalism in general. It's selling you a new version of yourself.
Yeah.
And what if that new version of yourself, like, how long does it take for them to be selling you a new version of yourself before it's no longer you at all? And it's because they can never control, like, the real you, because that's you and you are in control and you have agency. But if they slowly replace all of those pieces one by one with a new version, suddenly they own that and they know more about that version than you are. Like algorithms, it's exactly how like algorithms work, where they understand what you like better than you do, because they a lot of people spend like half their lives on these things. Yeah. So they're slowly replacing all of these things, and they have full control over that new thing. They can, like, if they want you to feel angry, then you will feel angry. If they want you to feel sad, you'll feel sad. So you're no longer in control of kind of how you go about your life until you realize that is exactly what's going on, and kind of pull the plug, so to speak, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's so annoying. And the way, like, it annoys me so much, the way advertising works. I have a big problem with advertising. Maybe it's something I'll like make a game on in general in future. Like, how manipulative, obviously by nature it's manipulative, but like the fact that the language that advertising uses is crazy. And I think people just take it for granted now, where they're not asking you or like, suggesting you do this. The language they use is like demanding, of like, buy it now, do this, do this. You are this, but you would be this if you did this, so do this. And so like, it's literally like telling you what to do and giving you like these little objectives. Like, you will not be happy until this happens. So
yeah, I noticed in Mothered you have the core objective. It's always trying to drive you towards this core objective.
Yeah.
Your goal is essentially to try and pull away from that. The gameplay in all of the games feels a bit more like you have sort of more agency than you'd expect. I mean, we're very used nowadays in game design to the sort of Skyrim quest marker thing.
Yeah.
So someone will say, I have no idea where this book is, go and find it for me. And then it pops up with exactly where it is on the map, and you go and find it, which is rubbish, and there's no player agency. There were parts in some of the games where I didn't really know what to do, and it was kind of a bit sideways what I actually had to do.
Yeah.
Again, it's hard to talk about that without spoiling, but one of them was it took me ages to work out why I couldn't move forward, was because there was something else I could do there that would allow me to work out how to move forward.
Yeah.
And that's missing in a lot of games now. People are very scared to make the player uncomfortable.
Yeah.
They're very scared to make the player, to challenge the player.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that your games can actually challenge the player. In Echostasis as well, I know you've got an update where it will pause when you stop moving.
Exactly.
But before that, it's even more challenging because you've got a timer running all the time.
Downright frustrating, downright like, infuriating for some players at times as well. Like, where it's despite how frustrating it is, you're pushing through, and the game is like, all right, like you really want to make progress at all costs, no matter what, and get to the end no matter what it takes. And then it starts saying like, you know what your purpose is here. It's to get to the end. That's all that matters, is getting to the end. No matter how miserable or frustrating this might be, getting to the end is the only reason you're here. Doesn't matter about what you're feeling. It doesn't matter about it's obvious that you're doing the wrong thing here. Our relationship with media is just to kind of get to the end so you can get to the next thing so that you can get to the end of that. And it's like kind of what is the end goal here? And so with Echostasis then it ends and then keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. So the goal there was, I guess, it was a challenging concept, I think, that I mean, it's not up to me whether I did it well or not, but I think I wanted to try and do is, I'd love the idea of a horror game that kind of pushes you past a point of your media literacy, being able to kind of take you further. Because, you know, a big problem I have with like horror movies or whatever is like, it's so, like the movie is signaling to you so obviously how you should be feeling at any one time, or how, like, you know, I'm at the first quarter of this movie, the characters are safe, we're fine, like, because it wouldn't make sense for something scary or something untoward to happen now. It's going to happen at the third part of the story. It's going to happen later, and the characters, like, I'm safe, but the characters are in danger, but I'm safe. So I wanted this thing where it's like, okay, so let's get through that story. Let's get through the 3-act structure of this whole thing. Literally, 1 core, 2 core, 3 cores. We get through that whole 3-act structure, and then it keeps going, and then you're kind of like, wait, how much more is there to this? That's why I didn't show most of the game for like the 4 years I was developing. I only showed that 3-act structure at the very start, and it keeps going downhill, but you keep pushing through it anyway. And so after that, you get through this thing, and then I'd like to think your media literacy doesn't really help you then beyond that, because it's like, okay, I guess I continue doing this, and then I do this, and then I do this, and the game just kind of keeps going and going and going, downhill, downhill, downhill. So it's like the curve of like, oh, I'm making a good job. Okay, the camera's there. I'm doing a good job. Oh God. And then you go down here, but then you keep going down, you keep going down, you keep going down into like the depths of existential nightmare territory. Yeah. So that's one thing I wanted to try and do a bit of. And then, you know, there's a lot of questions about the agency there. And you talked about the Skyrim quest marker, where it's like, okay, the game is telling me to do this. And so like, there comes a certain point where the game is just playing itself. Like you are not your protagonist, like your protagonist is kind of pulling you along. So you think you're pulling your protagonist along, but your protagonist is kind of pulling you along, being like, you know, just one step more, one step, there you go, you did it, buddy, well done. Ruffle your hair, give you a kiss on the head, you know? So what if something was to like, what if a protagonist was to realize that they're not being pulled along by the player, but they're the ones pulling the player along, and it's actually their story.
So essentially what you're talking about is sort of lulling you a little bit into the understood tropes of gameplay and then subverting it in a way.
I love that.
And you also, there's the same kind of deconstruction and subversion happens in the graphics. Because as things go on and as things become more corrupted, the stretching of textures, the intentional swimming, warping, stretching polygons into the camera frustum, all this sort of thing. It's almost like you're referencing the process of development or the history of broken games themselves to enhance that feeling of the story. The whole thing is being deconstructed by itself in a way.
Yeah, it's like an unreliable narrator kind of taken to the depths of like 3D rendering itself, you know, where like take for granted what an absolute miracle real-time 3D graphics are. Like it's like just untold amounts of 3-dimensional mathematics going on just to render graphics and stuff. So it's like super cool. Like the effect you're referencing is literally a glitch I discovered in the shaders I was using. I just used that, but I do love the idea of that being like, you know, just tearing it apart at the seams and it just being an unpleasant experience. Because I like another thing. I keep going off about like horror movies and horror media in general. Like I like the idea of, I think you kind of hide behind, it's what Mothered kind of is about in a little way. You hide behind your character and all of the bad stuff happens to your character. But I want to continue doing definitely is making sure, like if the subject of I think the subject of a horror anything shouldn't be the protagonist, it should be the viewer or the player or the whatever. Like I think they're the main subject that should be, so to make the player or the reader or the viewer the subject of the horror is something that I think is really valuable. And I haven't seen I wish, like, hopefully if people watching this could like recommend me stuff like that. That's absolutely my thing. Where you have this opportunity to give, especially with games, you have the opportunity to give a player a specific experience, and you're directing this experience so tightly, and you're just like making it happen to a character. And obviously, I'm not saying it's bad when there's like a protagonist and everything. Like the Silent Hill franchise and all of those are like my favorite. I love it, but that's telling a very specific story where the protagonist has, you know, a context and a backstory for being there, and you're telling the story. But I'd like to see more experimentation with the player themselves being, and it still exists. There's so much meta fiction out there and stuff. But I personally love when like the player themselves become like involved in the story, and that's why, you know, the first thing when you load up Echostasis is it asks you your name, and I really hope that people haven't, like anyone who puts in like ball sack or something, I'm like, damn it, it's going to be so bad when the game says, what if you're not ball sack? Because that's hilarious. And so I hope that the game kind of only works if you put in your own name. So some players were just kind of like, boob.
I mean,
like,
if your name is Ballsack, then you're really.
If your name is Ballsack, then, you know, then you're on the existential roller coaster. But that's probably been your whole life anyway.
You've had a great
Why
time
am I
already.
Ballsack?
Your whole life has been a game anyway, so it doesn't matter.
An existential train wreck. Oh, God.
I did want to talk a little bit about technical stuff, because so much of your game has really impressive, accurate post-production shaders that look like real sort of 80s VHS. Like, and they're so deftly used, they're sort of layered and moved around in a kind of very distinct and decisive manner.
Right, yeah.
How do you approach your creating those sort of shows? They must be quite complex to decide how you're going to layer them. Do you use a combination of found assets and coded things? Do you capture analog stuff? What do you do to make things look that cool, basically?
Well, first of all, I've never written a shader in my life. A lot of the stuff I've used have been either made by like friends of mine or just assets that you can buy on the Unity store. And I want to like destigmatize that absolutely for people. Like, these are just tools that you can have, and people have a sixth sense for what is like authentically made or not. Like, so the whole thing of like an asset flip is very obvious when it happens, but I think the careful use of assets is like just economical game design. Like, you know, like take From Software, for example, most of the animations in like Elden Ring, they're all reused. They're all, you know, you don't need to make it by yourself every time. These things exist already, and you can use them, and you should use them, because then you can build on them and make something that you would have never been able to build resource-wise or time-wise doing it all yourself. So I would encourage everyone to do what I do and just move forward at all times. Like, if this works, just do that. Like, my code base, the code bases I use like are terrible, but when I have people talk about the games, they say, oh, I liked this game, I liked this part, and I didn't like this part. Never once has said like, well, it was coded like shit, unless it's like unoptimized or something, whatever. But like no one will comment on your code. No one will comment on how things are implemented on a technical level for the most thing. That ideally you can get to the stage, if you can get to the stage where they talk about how it made them feel, like how you described it there as like cool and kind of, you know, however else, like that's what matters. So when it comes to how I put them together, I literally just, I was kind of a visual artist before ever being a programmer or anything. So I just love throwing stuff together and seeing what works, and just being patient and enjoying that process. That'll take you logically just to the point where you have something that you're proud of visually. And I'm quite strict with myself. Like, if it looks cool, I'm like, oh, that's cool. Can I make it look cooler? What if I do this? What if I do this? And then maybe roll it back a little bit and then try something else until I have something that I'm like, I don't think I've seen this before. I don't think, wouldn't it be cool if it looked like this instead? So it's all literally store-bought assets or like shaders I found online or like stuff that friends have made. And then once you have that, then you can just play around with it and then take parts away and yeah, it's suddenly like, you know, as soon as you start taking effects away or putting effects on, it has this like almost emotional thing, especially because all of these games are so like subjective in the way they're told. Like they're always they're not like objective fact-based stories. Here's what happened. They're all filtered through the mind of one of the characters. And like, so in Mothered, I try and give a lore reason as to why Mother looks the way she does and acts the way she does. And it's not entirely true. She's not literally a mannequin in that story, as is suggested. So, yeah, and then with the music side of it, it's important to say that, like, when it comes to the game stuff, like, that's, you know, my thing, but the music, it's such a heavy signature by Karl Barnes, who is the absolute, like, genius who does all of my music. So a lot of it is done with kind of a very authentic, like, using actual old vintage synthesizers and stuff, filtered through, recorded through actual tape and stuff. And it creates this kind of, I don't know, it's not something you can kind of hear the difference, but even an untrained ear, they might not hear the difference between like a digital tape emulator and a real tape, but you can feel the difference, I think you can really feel, I don't know, there's an authenticity and a warmth that you get through real tape. So this year, we're going to be hopefully taking the soundtrack that we've done for Echostasis and launching it like very soon. People really want that to happen. Yeah. And then later on in the year, we're going to do like a deluxe edition kind of thing where it's like a vinyl release. So it'll be
very cool.
full new artwork, done by my sister, Kat Gavin. You can get tattoos off her if you're in Dublin, by the way. She's also a tattoo artist. So the promotional artwork for all of the games, she does the black and white scraper board design of it, and she's also a tattoo artist, so you can also get that exact thing etched onto your skin for the rest of your life. So that's I have help as well, so that's finding the people you work with. It's something I'd like to do a little bit more of, is finding collaborators, but for me, like, I just had to get Echostasis done and out of my system, because if anyone was to like work with me on the game side of that, it would have driven them crazy, like, because it was just such a process of trial and error for like 4 years. But yeah, so
I was going to ask about, I had a thing on the list about Karl Barnes, because I know it is a massive part of all the games is music, but also sound designer. Do you do some of the sound design as well?
Yeah, I enjoy.
So it's kind of because they mesh together very well.
Yeah. So the way I'll say it is like the stuff that sounds shit, I've done it. And the stuff that sounds really cool and melodic and like musical, he's done it. So he can make music, I can just make discordant sounds. Yes. And
do they work, the discordant sounds? They're a part of it.
They certainly do, and I try and like lean into, that's another piece of advice I would give to anyone, is to lean into what you're capable of. And if you can only make weird sounds, well, make a game where weird sounds works, you know?
Yes.
So I think the soundtrack for like Mothered, for example, like that was, I want to say like half and half, because Karl found out I was making Mothered. I made it in a month, the whole game. So he found out about a week before release, and he was like, hold on, let me get you give me a brief. What's the game about? Feels like a fever dream, feels like all of these things. And he's like, I got you. And then a few days later, comes back with the tracks that he made for that game. They just hit it out of the park, first attempt. Yeah. So he made those songs in no time at all. And so he's literally a wizard when it comes to like understanding what you're going for and bringing the best out of that. So, and then I just made the ones that are just like weird pitch shifted sounds that sound like nauseating, I don't know, just tones and stuff. Just oral nausea.
There's your tagline for selling it to the people out there.
Yeah.
Would you like oral nausea?
It feels disgusting in my stomach.
Like nutrients.
Like nutrients. Delicious place.
My favourite. So your process, it sounds like, actually, let me rephrase this and reframe this in terms of what a lot of people talk about online. Because if you're getting into development of games and so on yourself, which a lot more people are in the recent sort of 5-6 years, especially, it seems to be blowing up massively. More and more people are doing it. It's becoming more and more accessible. There's an enormous amount of advice out there that either comes from people who've spent a lot of time working in very big companies, so their processes come from the huge structure of a large company, or people who haven't really shipped anything yet. Lots and lots of people are massively preoccupied with endless planning and deconstruction and pre-writing, and it sounds like you don't really do that. Your process sounds more like where I come from anyway, which is like being an artist or a musician or what have you, where you're expressing yourself through it. And then you're basically, well, I've got there, now I just need to tidy it up.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say, that you improvise your way through a lot of it?
For sure. And then you get to say, like, you get to pretend at the end, like, this was always the plan. And it totally wasn't ever.
That's art, isn't it, basically?
Yeah,
you're always saying, I always meant it to look this good.
And then you have a choice there whether you admit that or not. And I don't ever want to admit that, because I think that would only discourage people to be like, a thing like Echostasis doesn't just happen. Like, you can't just plan something like that out, because it'll never work. And so, like, I've tried, and I'm falling into the same trap now, because I recently bought a notebook and I just titled it Game 4. And I'm like, okay, blank page, done with the trilogy, done with all of my other stories, starting a new story. Where do I start? And then I start writing down stuff about, like, themes and stuff, and all these kind of nonsensical ways to start a game, like, because that's where I was. I'm used to working that way, because that's where I was with the end of Echostasis, and I'm bringing a lot of my workflow from the end of Echostasis to the start of this new thing. But it doesn't start the way it ends. Like, it starts in a very different place, where you're just throwing stuff together, and I want to, like, update all of my tools and my workflow. And so the best place for me to start, I need to remind myself of this all the time, is just to load up Unity, put in a character, make an environment, walk through the environment, and then ask yourself 1 million times, wouldn't it be cool if? Wouldn't it be cool if? Wouldn't it be cool if? Oh, and if this happens, then maybe this could happen. Once you do step 1, then step 2 might become obvious, and then step 3 might become obvious, and then, oh, maybe and at the very end, it kind of starts to be like, oh, what if this is a game about this? For me, like, I didn't know Echostasis was a game about, like, grief. Until, like, the last year or so. I like a year or two, maybe. Like, I thought it was a story. Like, the start, it was like, oh, it's a game about algorithms and echo chambers. At the end, it ended up being a story about grief and stuff. And, like, I'm fortunate enough to have not, like, experienced a huge amount of grief in my life. I'm very blessed by that. And it ended up, like, telling me the story kind of itself. And loads of artists have said something similar, where the story kind of reveals itself to them. Like, writers would say that, where the story reveals itself to them. Like, loads of people think that, like, my childhood was terrible because of mothers, and, like, I had a great childhood. My poor mother was, like, terrified that, like, oh, is that what you went through? Like, not at all. Like, just...
Did I make you pick that many apples?
I know, God. Did it suck as much as it did in the game? Did you have to, like, pick these, like, red apples against red trees and you couldn't find them? So, yeah, like, it's just how writers work, I guess, and it's taken me years to call myself a writer, but I guess, you know, you are. If you write stories, you're a writer. But, like...
it's a uniquely difficult thing in a way, especially solo development, because you have to be at a certain point in it ultra technical, like you're saying. Like, especially coming to the end, you've got to package everything up, make sure it works on all the different platforms, make sure your Steam thing's working fine, you've tagged it all, you've got a trailer, everything. None of that's really that creative. It's more sort of admin.
I know.
It's very Excel sheet. And then, as you say, you're coming out to creating something again. You have to get back into that sort of writing genuinely creative mode, where you're like, okay, don't restrict yourself with the boring stuff that you're going to do later. What if you could have any idea? And I don't think there's another art form, and I think it's fair to call them an art form, other than sort of indie game development, where you're going to be that beset by all sides of creativity, like from the ultra technical to the admin to the purely creative. It's sort of a uniquely difficult thing to do, I think.
Really is, yeah. And now that, like, I've formed a limited company within Ireland, and, like, I'm the admin side of it is getting to the point where it's just like, oh, what am I doing here? But it's just a necessary evil. But I guess I try, and what I want to do now as well with updating my workflow is get myself to the point where I can just, like, have, I don't know, imagine like a big studio space. Like the Unity project is a big, massive room, and I have a paintbrush, and I can do whatever I want with that. So remove as many barriers of, like, creation as I can, and just decrease the amount of steps between an idea and a thing in the scene or in whatever. And then I consider the technical side of that, as you mentioned, kind of a separate job. So the technical side of that is to set everything up so that I can go in there and just, like, be an artist and just kind of fuck around and find out, for lack of a better term. And that's where the creation happens. Like obviously it's all bound by what you're capable of doing technically, but now I want to increase that raise the bar of what I'm capable of technically. So the first step will be a lot of the unfun stuff of me learning new concepts and new coding practices and new tools within Unity, but that will allow me to do way cooler stuff. Like you can see with the Enigma Machine, I didn't have any kind of volumetric lighting or any of that kind of stuff. But then with Mothered and Echostasis, I did, and the visual identity of just improved so much. And now that's become like a core part of my brand, I guess. And so I want to find new ways to new tools, I guess, new tools. Like, what if they, like, I don't know, imagine if a painter discovered that they invented Paintbrush 2. Oh my God, there's a new paintbrush and I get to use it. So what can I do with this new tool? And so that's the next step for me is to slog through the technical stuff. And I wish I enjoyed that part.
Yeah.
And I'm so jealous of other people who do, but that's just, a necessary evil to get to where I want to be.
And the business side of it is also something that most people try their best to avoid and are kind of scared of.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned setting up a limited company. Up till now, when you've been developing stuff, have you sort of, worked in jobs, saved money, then taken time off to develop? Or have you worked jobs alongside things? Or did you just save up enough to just take a load of time out to do it? What's been your strategy, if you don't mind talking
Not
about
at
it,
all.
to try and,
No,
and make the break to being a developer?
I like transparency around this as well, and because it helps kind of everyone.
Yeah.
Where like, so when my first game, the Enigma Machine, dropped, it was like 2018. I was just out of college. I just graduated. Yeah. To be honest, I shouldn't have gotten a degree at all. I was terrible. I made the Enigma Machine with whatever little coding knowledge I knew, just loads of if statements, and I didn't know what a switch statement or anything was, like really. And I made that, and then I thought that would like make me hireable, but it wasn't. I wasn't really. I was still kind of unhireable by any like software job, and there wasn't a whole lot of game development jobs really at all in Ireland at that time, and it's still kind of true, but it's getting better. But I just bought a book on Java programming, which translates over to C# very well, which is what I use in Unity. So I kind of learned from scratch how to do programming, and then I eventually got a job in Galway, where I moved to Galway on the west of Ireland and worked in a place. It was great, but it was like not my thing. Like I'm not a good programmer by any means. Like the people there, I loved them. They were great. My own abilities were kind of holding me back though. And when you're working on something where you're just not good at it, it does infect your brain and your self-esteem and stuff. I just kind of leave every day feeling like a bit like an idiot, and that I'm struggling to keep up with everyone else who maybe this comes to naturally. Like mathematics just does not come to my brain at all. I cannot do anything. I'm so bad at maths. Like, but I want to encourage anyone who wants to get into game development. I never had to be that good at maths, because again, you can find other stuff online that fills in the blanks of what you can't do,
for sure.
and just keep working on what you can do. So I worked, so it was like an insurance software company. So not exactly the most exciting thing, but again, the people there were great. So I worked there for like 2 years. Worked there over COVID, so we were completely working from home. And then in the evenings, there was nothing else to do. I started making Echostasis Prologue. And so I released the Prologue in like March of 2021, and then I quit my job in April of 2021, late April, and I've been full-time since. So awesome. I don't want to just ever suggest to someone, quit your job and follow your dream, because that's like foolish. It's a foolish thing to suggest, because I was fortunate enough, not to call anything fortunate, that I had nothing to like spend money on. I was just saving money over COVID. So when I worked, I was just literally, I would get paid, my rent would come out, my shopping would come out, and then it was just building up and building up. So I had a lot of money saved by April of 2021. And so it was basically like my funds went up, and then as of April, it's just like Steam sales as it goes down. Just a little top up every now and again of like, I made Mothered in that year, because I was meant to release Echostasis in October of 2021. Nice. And I was so annoyed that I didn't have a game in October of 2021 that I was pissed off about that. So I was like, fuck, I'm gonna get a game out in October 2021 no matter what. So the 1st of October, I started working on this idea of like, what if there was you have to spend a week with your mother in the woods, in her house, but it's just a mannequin, and the game never talks about how weird that is, and you're kind of on your own with this idea. So I started making that, and like 29 days later, I released that game. I in my head, it had to be out in time for Halloween, and no one played it. No one played it. And over the next few months, then people started to discover this like very strange little game, and I hated it when it came out because I was working like 16, 14-hour days.
Yeah, that's a short turnaround.
Yeah, I went to A&E, like with like heart palpitations and stuff from like overwork.
Caffeine and stuff. Or
just overwork. Way too much. The stress of development, like so. But it came together, and I think weirdly enough, like I was having fever dreams and stuff while I was making it because I just got sick all the time, and it definitely infected the final product, I think. Yeah. Not to say that was like a good choice or anything, but it is what it is. And so that was actually the game. The game I made in 29 days is the thing that's kind of still, like most people know, mothered over anything else, which is, great, but it's also like 29 days. Is that all it took? Like, and this other game that took like 4 years. Now, once I actually start promoting that game, then I think that'll start to kind of take off as well in a little way. And once I fixed it a little way, once I put out the next patch. But yeah, so that's basically what I've been doing. That managed to get me to the point where I did a few like trailer commissions as well on the side, making trailers for people. And that got me to the point of late May 30th, 2024, when Echostasis actually came out. Like, 3 years later.
Yeah, so was that longer in development than you expected then?
Oh my God, yeah. Again, I thought it would, the
3
demo...
years longer or something.
Yeah, the game came out in March or something.
It was very shortly ago it came out. It was because I had it on wishlist for a long time.
I know, yeah. People thought it was like gone, dead in the water, That's just like, I just scaled it up and scaled it up and scaled it up. It was never meant to be as big as it was, and like, that's always the way. And so I can't wait to just make something where I know the scale at the start.
Maybe you should do that next. Maybe the next thing should be, instead of being gigantic, should be another, because Mothered is primarily one environment.
Exactly, yeah.
But you make a story within that, and it's more, the story's more important. So maybe you should do another one of those, because then it will give you like after such a long thing, which has been kind of torturous birth, it would be good to have something that's just kind of quick. And
that's exactly why the first thing I'm doing basically with the next project is like making a house, and the story takes place in the house. And that's, so you're dead right. I was saying it for years, where like the next thing is not going to be this, it's going to be so small, because it doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to be impactful if it's small. Like, and I think now more than ever, people love small games.
Oh yeah, for
sure. The biggest selling point for me, if someone recommends me a game, they say, "Oh, it's 2 hours long." I'm like, "Say what?" I'm there,
Oh, did you ever play Silent Hill 4: The Room?
No, never did.
So that's an odd one. It's like the main gameplay of it isn't the most fun, but the premise of it is, between each scene you go back to your flat and you're locked in it, actually chained in it. And that's suddenly first person, and that's incredibly creepy, full of jump scares, really genuinely frightening and chilling. Wow. And it's so much better than the rest of the game. So it's just supposed to be this bridging world, like a liminal space between going into the main, running around, hitting things. But there's nothing really chilling or scary about running around hitting things with a stick or what have you. But the room itself is really scary. And
they could have like focused on that,
and it's exactly what you're saying, where there's a kind of claustrophobia to it, and you can take one environment. Like if you play something like Observer, they're constantly twisting the graphics and twisting the same rooms and worlds over and over again, and you can just reuse the same environment, but change the world around it and change the player's experience. You can get so much out of a small space, I think.
It's so effective. Like, did you see that Doom mod, the MyHouse thing?
Oh, I've downloaded MyHouse. I've told her I can't have any spoilers for it, so I've downloaded it. I haven't played it yet.
That is one of those things where it's like, this is really effective horror. And for effective horror, I think actually a big budget is like kind of the enemy of good horror in a lot of ways. Now, not always. Sometimes some ideas you need a budget for, but you don't necessarily need a good budget to get into the fears of someone. I think oftentimes if a big studio is given like, I don't know, 200 million to make a horror film, they feel like they need to justify this money. And then suddenly they're well, now you have to show the horror and you have to like show all of these things when sometimes the horror that takes place in the person's mind is more effective.
It's the most horrible.
Yeah. You're like telling someone to like, oh, I always say like, you know, there's a hallway with a door at the end and the door is slightly ajar and there's complete darkness behind it. That's terrifying.
Pretty scary.
Yeah, because you're like, your brain is like, well, what am I afraid of? And I'm going to project that onto the darkness, where they say like, what if it's a man? Ooh, there's a man behind that door. It's like, oh, okay, it's just a man.
Or the classic, there's nothing scarier than when you wake up at night and your coat's on the back of the door and it's always a terrifying monster.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Oh, God.
Exactly.
That sort of shadow in the corner, isn't it? It's more scary than an actual monster in a way.
And
Although if there was one, that would be scary too.
Make huge use of that as like an independent horror creator. I've always thought that horror as a concept and as a media genre is kind of owned by the indies in a lot of ways.
Yes,
It seems to be like, you know, their thing, and I think it should be in a lot of ways, because you don't need a lot of money and you don't need anything corporate or big to get to the heart of that. So yeah, it's something I want to see a lot more of, and I want to keep the small scale with my stuff. Now, even if I have like the opportunity to scale up and scale up and scale up, I think, as we were saying earlier, like we were talking about it, like that could distract from what has worked for me in the past. And I need to be very careful and mindful about, you know, going bigger just for the sake of it. Whereas if I want to continue doing what I'm doing, which I do, I want to continue making weird little psychological horror games, I just need to continue making something small.
Yeah.
You know? Woo! Hooray for that.
So is there anything that you've come across technically when you've been developing stuff that's like a real pitfall that you really wish you'd known before you started it, and that other people using Unity can sort of learn from, or has it all been pretty smooth sailing?
That's a good thing. Like I can't actually think of anything, because I feel like anyone who uses Unity knows more technical stuff than I do. Like when it comes to like coding stuff. Like now I know, I don't know, good use of like materials and lighting is something that can bring a project from, you know, looking like a Unity project, which is one of the first things I did when I started making games was first step, can I make this not look like a Unity game? Because at the time, especially like 2018, a Unity game had this kind of like connotation of like lack of quality or cheap or amateur or whatever. So how can I make this not look like what they expected to? And so I went hard into like an old kind of VHS aesthetic, and especially to kind of appeal to the nostalgia of that we all feel around this. I don't know what it is about VHS, it just kind of feels like an old hazy memory or something. Especially, I just generally find analog technology way cooler, because it can be like...
Oh, it is. It objectively is cooler.
It just objectively is cooler. Like it's physically on the thing and you can see it, and it can be interrupted, it can wear with time, it can be hijacked. All of these things that like are super cool.
Sort of a mess is a fingerprint of everything it's been to, or like a memory. It's actually got a memory.
It literally is like, a memory. And I always feel like, I swear when I like look at my memories from like being a kid, I swear I see them in like an old, like a really old, like a VHS tape that's been like smashed to the wall. And like it's just so warped and thing, and memories kind of do like kind of fade over time and they warp. It's like Chinese whispers where and the more you remember it slightly differently every time, and that's no different to when you play a VHS tape where it kind of like you lose detail every single time, or new details come in or whatever. And so again, I this is what happens when you ask me a story or ask me a question about technical details. Like I don't know, like I end up just going into the whole thing of like, isn't it crazy how it feels like a memory? It's not technical at all. That's just some highfalutin nonsense. But I think...
I know what you mean about trying to avoid a certain look, because I'm using Unreal. There's definitely what people call an Unreal look.
There is,
it's a sort of very shiny, trying to do photoreal, but probably not achieving it. And very hard to make it look dirty.
And so when you're going for photoreal, like you're then competing with the uncanny valley, because like there's a correct way to do photoreal and an incorrect way. Now you can do like stylized photorealism, which is like obviously then you get to I'd call that's what I'm going for, especially with something like Mothered. I'd say that's like stylized photorealism, where it's like I don't know, lights don't really work like that, but it feels correct. You know, it just feels like this is what it should be. With the Unreal thing as well, yeah, there's like overly shiny, there's like that motion blur and those lens flares and everything feels like super slick.
Either that or it looks like Fortnite, one of the two.
I know, yeah, there are two genres. But yeah, that's I think, yeah, I just, whatever I can do, I literally like fiddle with everything until, same with music, I just fiddle with everything until it feels correct. And the technical details of the knobs that I'm twiddling with, I don't really like know or care a lot of the time. As long as I know, here's what the output usually is when this happens, I'm like, okay, cool. And then there's certain kinds of things where I am obsessed with those details and the technical stuff, like when it comes to like, I don't know, more on the like visual side, I guess, or yeah. So it's interesting. Like I think I'll continue to do that with the next thing, where I just again twiddle with all the knobs until it feels correct. Yeah.
So if you can have one final bit of advice for budding game developers out there,
yeah,
you've
like
got some good bits in here, I think. But is there anything you could, like, if we can phrase it maybe as, what is the one thing you know now that you wish you'd known? Or what's the one thing you'd pass on?
I think it's like ultra cliche, but I guess maybe I'll try and find a way that might click differently. Is like, you gotta just do it, you know? Like, because the as with anything, starting is the worst part, and I promise you it'll get better. And the goal is, and it will happen if you do it and start, you will get to the point where you cannot wait to load up that project the next day, where you're like, oh, I can't wait to see the cool thing I did yesterday, and experiment with what happens if I do this instead, and the ideas will come to you. Like, if you have a blank canvas, just throw anything on that canvas, because a blank canvas can be anything. But it's never going to be anything until you do a thing. Yeah. And so with every choice you make, just keep making choices. Doesn't matter. You can always change it if you need to, but chances are you won't, because you'll find cool ideas. Once you go to step 2, to step 3, to step 4, step 5 will reveal itself, and then step 6, and you'll end up with something that is like, how the hell did I end up with this? Nothing comes from planning really until you, like, a good idea is nothing without execution. And, you know, you have to just execute on it. And once you start, it'll feel laborious and dull and awful, just, having to start this project and I don't know what to do, but put anything on the page. And you'll get to the point where it's like, for me now, like, working on games is how I used to play games. Like, the excitement of like, I load up the thing and I get to like play around with it. And that's like a puzzle. It became a puzzle for me. But it wasn't that at the start. Like, it's easy to think that people who make games are like, you know, they're just really into this. Or they're like, they weren't always into it. They eventually they clicked with it eventually. So find that click, that point where it clicks, and then I think that will just take you the rest of the way.
Run with it, yeah.
There's not a version of myself that ever thought I was going to be doing what I'm doing. Yeah. I felt like an imposter, and I still do, and I don't think I ever not want to feel like an imposter in a way, you know? So,
in a way, just do it. Just do it, and don't worry about, I just need a small team to get together. Yeah.
The team is not going to form around you, bowing at the idea of your cool idea. You know, your idea is nothing without execution. So you just need to get in there and do it. And whatever if you're not good at maths, avoid doing the maths. Find a way that will allow you to not do maths, and that will probably inform the project as well. Yeah. It'll like, can I do this without doing this? Does a game need loads of code? Does it need, I'm not good at art. Can you make a game without art? Like, just try it. I don't know.
Yes.
Work with what you got. That's what I'd say. I think that's more the advice. Work with yourself rather than against yourself. So, yeah.
I think that's great advice and a great way to end it. Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome. Pleasure. Thank you so much.